My friend, let me ask you, what would you do if the person you trusted most, the father of your child, kicked you in front of everyone you knew? Have you ever felt that kind of betrayal, where the pain cuts so deep it almost steals your breath? Tonight, I want you to walk with me through a story that will break your heart and heal it. Trust me, you'll want to hear every word. Please like, share, and subscribe. The ballroom was alive with laughter, music, and the faint clinking of champagne glasses. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. To the outside world, it was just another night of indulgence for the city's elite. But hidden beneath the glamour, something darker was about to unfold. Sophia Carter walked in slowly, one hand resting protectively on her 6-month pregnant belly. Her dress was modest compared to the shimmering gowns around her, a soft cream color that clung gently to her growing figure. She was nervous, but her heart carried a small hope. Her husband, Damien Carter, had promised that tonight would be different, that he would introduce her proudly, that he would show the world that she was still his wife and the mother of his child. She had believed him because she wanted to believe. For months, whispers of his affair had circulated. Rumors of late-night meetings, photos of him with a younger woman, and the gut-wrenching moments when he would come home smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. She had chosen silence, convincing herself that once he saw her tonight, once he saw the life they had created together, he would change. But as she stepped into the glittering crowd, her hope began to crumble. Damien stood near the center of the ballroom, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tuxedo cut sharp enough to slice through steel. His confidence filled the room. And draped over his arm was Elena Ross, the mistress everyone whispered about. Elena was stunning in a crimson dress that hugged her curves, her laughter high and throaty as she whispered in Damien's ear. He smiled down at her, not noticing the pregnant wife slowly walking closer, clutching her small purse like a shield. Sophia's heart pounded. She told herself to stay calm, to simply approach, to smile, to remind Damien of who she was. She had been his partner for 8 years, the woman who had stood by him when he had nothing, who had believed in him before the money, the success, the luxury. She wanted the world to see her place beside him, not the mistress flaunting on his arm. When Damien finally noticed her, the room seemed to hush. His eyes widened briefly, then narrowed with irritation. He wasn't happy to see her. No. He was embarrassed. Embarrassed that his pregnant wife had dared to show up uninvited, that she might ruin the image he was trying to project to his investors and friends. "What are you doing here?" he hissed under his breath as she reached him. Her lips trembled. "Damien, I just wanted to be here. I thought." But she didn't get to finish. Elena let out a mocking laugh, her eyes glittering with cruelty. "Oh, Damien, you didn't tell me she was coming. How quaint. She looks like she came from the clearance rack." The group of men around them chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh at the mistress's cruelty or pretend they hadn't heard. Sophia's face burned. She felt the sting of tears forming, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. Damien's jaw tightened. He wanted her gone, and he didn't care how. "You should leave, Sophia. You're embarrassing me." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Please, Damien, don't do this. I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." For a moment, a flicker of humanity crossed his face. But then Elena whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened into stone. The next moment would sear itself into Sophia's memory forever. In front of his friends, his investors, his mistress, and dozens of flashing cameras, Damien shoved Sophia's hand away and kicked her, hard, sending her stumbling backward. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Her cry pierced the music as she clutched her stomach, trying to protect the baby inside. She fell against a chair, the pain shooting through her body like fire. The crowd froze. Some covered their mouths. Others turned away in shame, pretending not to have seen. Elena smirked, satisfied, as if the kick had been aimed at her rival's dignity as much as her body. Damien straightened his tuxedo, his expression cold, and muttered, "Pathetic." Sophia's hands shook as she tried to push herself upright. Every eye in the room was on her, but no one moved to help. The people she once considered friends avoided her gaze, terrified of crossing the powerful man standing above her. She had never felt so alone. Her heart raced with fear for the baby. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering, "Stay with me, please." And in that moment, a fire began to burn inside her chest. The humiliation cut deep, but the rage went deeper. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. As Damien turned his back to her and laughed with Alina as though nothing had happened, Sophia made a silent vow. She would endure the pain. She would survive this night. And when the time was right, she would rise again. Not as the broken wife Damien thought he had destroyed, but as a woman ready to bring him and his mistress to their knees. And none of them, not Damien, not Alina, not the so-called friends who stood frozen tonight, had any idea of the storm that was about to come. Sophia Carter hadn't always lived in glittering ballrooms or walked beneath chandeliers that cost more than her childhood home. Long before her name became attached to Damien Carter, she had been just Sophia Reyes, a girl from a modest neighborhood in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner. Life was never easy, but it taught Sophia resilience. She grew up understanding the value of sacrifice, watching her mother give up everything so her daughter could have a better chance. Her childhood was painted with simple joys: reading borrowed books under the dim light of a street lamp, playing with neighborhood kids on cracked sidewalks, and dreaming of something more. She never believed she'd live in a mansion or be photographed at charity galas. Her dreams were smaller but heartfelt: to finish school, to have a family, to be loved. When she earned a scholarship to a state university, it felt like a miracle. Sophia studied hard, juggling part-time jobs as a barista and a library assistant to pay for what her scholarship didn't cover. She majored in business administration, not because she was passionate about numbers, but because she believed it could open doors to stability. She wanted to break the cycle of struggle for herself and for the family she hoped to have one day. It was during her junior year that she met Damien. He wasn't the billionaire tycoon he would later become. Back then, he was a smooth-talking salesman with dreams bigger than his bank account. He worked at a car dealership near campus, and Sophia had walked in one rainy afternoon, desperate for a reliable used car to drive to work and classes. Damien had spotted her immediately. His charm was magnetic: broad smile, confident voice, the kind of man who could make you feel like the center of the universe with just a glance. He sold her the car, but more than that, he sold her the dream of being loved. He showered her with attention, bringing her coffee during late-night study sessions, surprising her with flowers he said he'd borrowed from display tables at work. For Sophia, who had never known steady affection, it felt like magic. Within a year, they were inseparable. Damien proposed in the most dramatic way he could afford, in the middle of a crowded park with a cheap silver ring and a promise that one day I'll give you the world. Sophia said yes, not because of the ring, but because of the sincerity she thought she saw in his eyes. They married young, with barely enough money to pay the rent on a one-bedroom apartment. But Sophia didn't care. She believed in him. She believed in them. She worked tirelessly, holding down a steady job at a small bookstore while supporting Damien's ever-changing career pursuits. He jumped from sales to real estate to small investments, and she stood by him, cooking late dinners, encouraging him when deals fell through, and reminding him that success took time. When Damien finally landed a breakthrough in real estate, Sophia was there, carrying boxes into their first real office, answering phones, and filing contracts without pay. She was his unpaid secretary, his quiet partner, and his most loyal cheerleader. Every win he celebrated, she celebrated too. Every late-night meeting, she stayed awake for his return. When his company began to thrive, he credited himself for the genius moves. But Sophia knew the truth. She had carried him through the early years, sacrificing her own ambitions to fuel his. And then came the baby. When Sophia found out she was pregnant, she had cried tears of joy. To her, it was the final piece of the life she'd always wanted: a family. Damien had seemed happy at first, kissing her belly, telling her they would raise a child in luxury, far from the hardships she had endured as a girl. She thought it was proof that all her sacrifices had been worth it. But slowly, things changed. Damien grew colder. The more successful he became, the more distant he was. Business trips stretched into nights out. Lavish dinners were spent with colleagues she never met. And whispers of Elena, the mistress, began to creep into Sophia's life. At first, she refused to believe them. She told herself she was paranoid, that her husband was just busy, but deep down she knew. She could see it in the way he stopped looking at her, in the way his laughter was louder with others than with her. Still, she held on. She believed love meant endurance, that marriage meant forgiveness. She endured the loneliness of a large, empty mansion. She endured the snide remarks about her boring maternity dresses. She endured the humiliation of being excluded from public appearances. For Sophia, the only thing that mattered was the tiny heartbeat inside her, the child who kicked gently when she cried, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone. But love built on sacrifice can only hold so much weight. Every cruel word, every late night, every trace of perfume that wasn't hers chipped away at the woman who had once believed in fairy tales. And yet, even as her marriage crumbled, Sophia clung to one truth. She was stronger than he realized. Damien might see her as fragile, as someone to discard, but she knew the fire inside her had not died. She had survived poverty. She had survived heartbreak. She had survived humiliation. She would survive this too. Her only mistake was believing that endurance was enough. But endurance had its limits, and the night Damien kicked her in front of his friends and his mistress, that limit was shattered. Because deep inside, Sophia's story was not just one of betrayal. It was the story of a woman who would rise again, not as the timid wife who once stood in Damien's shadow, but as a force that would destroy both him and the mistress who mocked her. And the first crack in Damien's perfect empire was about to appear sooner than anyone expected. The Carter Foundation Charity Gala was supposed to be the highlight of the season. Every year, the city's most powerful families gathered under one gilded roof to sip champagne, pledge donations, and measure each other's worth by the sparkle of their jewels and the weight of their last investment. For Damien Carter, it was more than just a gala. It was his stage, his chance to parade himself as a king among lesser men. The Metropolitan Hotel ballroom glistened like a palace carved out of light. Marble floors reflected the glow of massive chandeliers, while gold-trimmed drapes cascaded from 20-foot ceilings. Tables draped in silk overflowed with roses imported from Italy, and crystal glasses filled with vintage wine. A string quartet played softly in the corner, but their music was drowned out by the chatter of billion-dollar deals and the self-satisfied laughter of men who believed they owned the world. On this night, every detail mattered. Journalists from society magazines lingered near the entrance, their cameras flashing with every notable arrival. Young women in sequined gowns whispered behind jeweled clutches, trading gossip about who was secretly bankrupt, who had married for power, and who was cheating with whom. Men in tuxedos circled like wolves, their smiles sharp, their handshakes colder than ice. And at the center of it all, Damien thrived. He moved through the crowd like a conductor directing a symphony of admiration. He had cultivated this image for years. The self-made success, the billionaire who could charm senators and CEOs with a single smirk. Tonight, he wore it proudly, his hand resting on Elena's back, as though she were a prize he had won. Elena, of course, basked in the attention. Her red dress shimmered under the chandeliers, and every flick of her hair was calculated for maximum effect. She laughed too loudly, leaned too close, and flaunted Damien as though she were daring anyone to challenge her place at his side. For the first time, she was not the hidden mistress. Tonight, she was the woman Damien wanted the world to see. What neither of them expected was the quiet storm walking through the entrance in a cream maternity gown. Sophia's arrival was not accompanied by flashing cameras or whispered admiration. She wasn't draped in diamonds, and her dress wasn't made by some famous designer. But she carried something Elena did not: dignity. Even with fear twisting inside her, she held her head high as she walked past the curious stares. Her presence was a reminder that Damien Carter was still married, that he had a wife, and that wife carried his child. The ballroom reacted as though an invisible glass had shattered. Conversations faltered. The musicians stumbled on their notes. Eyes shifted quickly from Damien to Sophia, then to Elena. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Damien's friends, men who had shared whiskey with him in private clubs and laughed at his cruel jokes, watched carefully. Their expressions betrayed what they truly thought, that Sophia didn't belong here. To them, she was a disruption to the spectacle. Their loyalty was not to her, but to Damien's power. Sophia felt every stare like a dagger. She wanted to turn and leave to escape the suffocating silence, but she kept walking, her heels tapping against the marble floor with quiet determination. Her hand never left her belly. Her baby was with her, and that gave her strength. She reached Damien just as the cameras shifted, clicking furiously to capture the scandalous tableau: a wealthy man, his glamorous mistress, and the pregnant wife who dared to show up uninvited. "Darling," Sophia said softly, her voice trembling but clear, "I wanted to stand with you tonight." The words should have softened him. They should have reminded him of who she was, of everything she had given. But Damien's face hardened like granite. He leaned close, his voice sharp enough to pierce her heart. "You don't belong here, Sophia. Go home before you embarrass yourself further." Her lips parted in shock. She wanted to plead, to remind him of the baby, but before she could, Elena leaned in with a wicked smile. "Oh, let her stay," Elena purred, her voice loud enough for their circle to hear. "It will be fun for everyone to see the difference between us." The men around them chuckled nervously. Some lifted their glasses as though toasting Damien's audacity. Others looked away, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. Sophia's face burned, but she stood her ground. The orchestra struck up a new tune, a dramatic waltz that seemed to mock her trembling heart. Damien's investors and associates gathered closer, hungry for entertainment, pretending to be engrossed in conversation while their eyes devoured the unfolding scandal. Sophia felt her baby kick inside her. It was a tiny push, but it reminded her she wasn't alone. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet Damien's eyes. "I am your wife," she whispered fiercely, "and I deserve to stand beside you." That was when Damien snapped. His mask of charm cracked, revealing the cruelty underneath. In one swift motion, he shoved her hand aside and delivered the brutal kick that sent her stumbling. Gasps tore through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. The music stopped. Sophia collapsed against a chair, clutching her stomach, her cry echoing through the hall like a broken note. For a moment silence reigned, and then the whispers began. Some horrified, some gleeful, all poisonous. Did he just... in front of everyone? My God, she's pregnant. But Damien didn't flinch. He adjusted his tuxedo, smirked at Elena, and said coldly, "Some people don't know their place." The cruelty of it all seared into Sophia's soul. She looked around desperately for help, but no one moved. Not one so-called friend, not one of Damien's powerful allies stepped forward. And in that moment of betrayal, not just by her husband but by everyone who watched, something inside her broke. And something else was born. Because humiliation in front of the world can destroy a woman, or it can create a storm no man is prepared to face. Damien Carter had always loved control. From the time he was a struggling salesman, he discovered that charm could be a weapon sharper than any blade. He had learned how to smile at the right people, flatter the right egos, and twist words into gold. To outsiders, he was the story of the American dream. A man who built an empire from nothing. But behind the polished mask was a hunger that could never be satisfied. He had grown addicted to the feeling of being admired. Every deal closed, every article praising him, every photograph that placed him among the city's elite, these were his fuel. And when that hunger mixed with pride, it created a monster. To Damien, Sophia was no longer the woman who once lifted him up. She was a reminder of the years he wanted to forget. The years of scraping by, of counting pennies, of driving a second-hand car. By the time he had wealth, he saw her not as a partner, but as a weight. She was quiet, simple, dressed modestly, unwilling to change herself to match the glittering new world he had built. She wasn't glamorous. She didn't sparkle under the chandeliers the way Elena did. And worst of all, she carried a child, something that reminded him of responsibility when all he wanted was freedom. Damien told himself he deserved more. More excitement, more attention, more beauty. That was when Elena Ross entered his life like a flame. Elena had been a junior marketing associate at one of Damien's partner firms. 26 years old, bold and unapologetically ambitious, she had the kind of beauty that demanded a second look. Her hair was jet black, her lips always painted in daring red, and her laugh carried across any room. She was not content to be unnoticed. She wanted power, and she was willing to use her allure to get it. The first time Damien saw her, she leaned against a marble bar at a private event, sipping champagne as if she owned the place. She caught his eye and didn't look away. That was all it took. Their affair began in secret, stolen moments in hotel rooms, whispered phone calls after midnight, gifts bought with company funds disguised as business expenses. Alina fed Damien's ego like no one else. She called him brilliant, untouchable, a man destined to rule the city. She made him believe he was a god. And unlike Sophia, Alina never asked him to slow down, never spoke of responsibility or sacrifice. She was fire and danger, and Damien craved it. Soon, she wasn't just a mistress, she was his addiction. What Elena wanted, however, went beyond affection. She didn't just want Damien's attention, she wanted his world. She wanted the mansion, the luxury cars, the invitations to galas, the headline photos. She was tired of being someone's secret, she wanted to be seen. Sophia was the obstacle. To Alina, Sophia was laughable. A small-town wife, who didn't know how to dress, who clung to her belly as though pregnancy were a badge of honor, instead of, in Elena's eyes, a weakness. Alina mocked her behind closed doors, imitating her simple manner of speaking, ridiculing the way she dressed in department store dresses, while others wore couture. Alina had convinced Damien that Sophia was a burden holding him back from the life he truly deserved. And Damien, blinded by arrogance, believed her. The idea of discarding his wife felt less like betrayal and more like progress. But the true cruelty wasn't just their affair, it was how they flaunted it. Damien began taking Elena to business events, introducing her to investors, whispering in her ear while cameras flashed. He wanted the world to see him as bold enough to replace his wife before even divorcing her. Elena encouraged it, loving the shock, loving the whispers, loving how society began to shift their gazes from Sophia to her. The night of the gala, the cruelty reached its peak. Damien wanted to prove something, that he was untouchable, that even his pregnant wife could be humiliated without consequence. And Elena wanted to bask in that moment, to watch Sophia crumble in public. When Damien kicked Sophia, Elena's smirk told the truth. She enjoyed it. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp like the others. Instead, she smiled as if she had finally won. For her, it wasn't just about stealing Damien, it was about erasing Sophia entirely. But arrogance is dangerous. Neither Damien nor Elena noticed the cameras flashing, the reporters scribbling notes, the shocked expressions of guests who would whisper about that night for months. They believed their power protected them, that no scandal could touch them. What they didn't know was that power can shift in an instant. And when it shifts, it doesn't just fall, it crashes. Sophia's tears that night weren't the tears of defeat. They were the quiet storm building behind her eyes. While Damien and Elena laughed in their arrogance, Sophia was already changing. The humiliation had cracked something inside her, and through that crack, strength was pouring in. Damien thought he had broken her. Elena thought she had erased her. But both of them had made the same fatal mistake. They underestimated the woman they believed was powerless. And by the time they realized what Sophia was truly capable of, it would already be too late. The sound of Sophia's cry after Damien's kick still lingered in the ballroom long after the music stopped. For a moment, the glamorous crowd stood paralyzed, unsure whether to look at her, at Damien, or at the floor. The silence was louder than any symphony, heavy with judgment and cowardice. Sophia lay against the edge of a chair, her arms wrapped around her stomach, trying desperately to shield the baby within. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Pain radiated through her, not just from the cruel kick, but from the realization of what had just happened. The man she once trusted with her life had humiliated her in front of the entire world. But if she expected help, she didn't find it. The women whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes wide with pity or curiosity. The men shifted uncomfortably, sipping champagne to mask their guilt for doing nothing. These were people who smiled at her at dinners, who once praised her for her kindness, who claimed to be her friends. Yet not one of them moved to lift her up. Reporters stationed at the entrance had rushed forward, cameras clicking with merciless speed. The flashes lit the room like lightning. Their lenses didn't miss a thing. The mistress smirking in red, the billionaire standing tall, and the pregnant wife on the floor, clutching her belly. Within hours, the photos would spread across social media, plastered on gossip sites, dissected on news channels. Sophia forced herself to stand. Her knees trembled, her face pale, but she would not give Damien the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. With one hand on the chair for support and the other on her stomach, she rose slowly. Her eyes swept across the sea of faces, searching for a trace of humanity. None came. "Are you all right, Mrs. Carter?" a timid voice finally asked. It belonged not to a guest, but to a young waiter standing near the edge of the crowd. He had dropped his tray in shock at the scene. His question was a whisper compared to the silence, but it carried weight. Sophia gave the faintest nod, swallowing back tears. She wanted to scream, to rage at the crowd for their silence, but her dignity forced her lips closed. Damien, meanwhile, acted as if nothing had happened. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip of wine, and turned his attention back to his associates. His tone was calm, arrogant. "Now where were we?" The cruelty was unbearable. Elena clung to his arm, her laughter bubbling up again, as though Sophia's pain were entertainment. To them, she was nothing more than an obstacle that had been removed. Sophia felt her chest tighten with humiliation. The whispers around her grew louder. "She looks so weak. Can you believe he did that?" She should have stayed home. What did she expect? Her vision blurred, not just from tears, but from the weight of shame pressing down on her. She had been reduced to nothing in their eyes, a foolish wife who dared to step into a world where she no longer belonged. But humiliation has a strange way of birthing clarity. In that moment, Sophia understood something important. The people in that room would never defend her. They had chosen their side, and it was Damien's. To them, she was expendable. To Damien, she was disposable. She drew in a shaky breath, straightened her back as best she could, and began walking toward the exit. Every step was agony, but every step also felt like a declaration. She would not let them see her fall. The cameras followed her. Flash after flash captured her swollen belly, her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands. By the time she pushed open the ballroom doors, her humiliation was immortalized. The city would wake up to her disgrace. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap. She leaned against a pillar, trying to steady herself. Her chest heaved, her stomach clenched, and fear for her baby nearly crushed her. She whispered again, "Stay with me, please," as if her child could hear and understand. She wanted to call a taxi, to disappear into the night, but the paparazzi swarmed like vultures. Questions were shouted, cameras shoved in her face. "Did Damien hit you, Mrs. Carter? Is the baby safe? Are you planning to divorce him?" Sophia covered her face, pushing past the frenzy. The flashes were blinding, the voices deafening. She wanted nothing more than to vanish, to crawl into a place where no one could see her brokenness. By the time she reached the curb, tears had already streaked her makeup. She climbed into a waiting cab, her voice barely audible as she gave the address of her home. The driver didn't ask questions. He had seen enough scandals in this city to recognize one when it unfolded. As the car pulled away, Sophia stared out the window at the glittering skyline. The city sparkled, but all she saw was betrayal. Her heart ached, her body trembled, but deep inside, something was shifting. That night, the internet exploded. Videos surfaced within hours, showing Damien's kick from every angle. Hashtags trended worldwide. Justice for Sophia, Damien the monster, pregnant and abused. Public opinion turned fast. But in the world of the wealthy, scandal could be buried with money. Damien believed it would blow over, that his lawyers and publicists would silence the noise, that his empire was untouchable. He laughed in Elena's ear as he scrolled through headlines, dismissing them as jealous nobodies with too much time online. What he didn't know was that Sophia had reached her breaking point. She had spent years enduring, forgiving, sacrificing. That night ended all of it. The humiliation didn't destroy her. It freed her, because Sophia was no longer the timid wife who waited at home. She was a mother fighting for her child. She was a woman betrayed, broken, and ready to rise. And Damien was about to learn that the woman he kicked in front of his friends was the same woman who would bring his empire to its knees. The cab ride home was quiet, but inside Sophia's chest a storm raged. The hum of the city outside, the neon lights flickering across the windows, the driver's silence. None of it mattered. Her world had ended on that ballroom floor. When the cab pulled up to the gates of the Carter estate, Sophia hesitated. The mansion loomed before her, its marble pillars glowing in the moonlight, the kind of house people dreamed of owning. But to her, it no longer felt like home. It was a gilded cage, and tonight, the cage had snapped shut. She stepped out slowly, clutching her stomach. The driver offered to help, but she shook her head. Pride wouldn't let her lean on anyone. She walked up the long driveway alone, each step echoing her emptiness. Inside, the mansion was silent. No staff lingered. No warm lights greeted her. The rooms, usually so meticulously staged for Damien's guests, felt cold and hollow. She collapsed onto the velvet couch in the living room, her body trembling. Tears spilled freely now. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing for everything she had lost: her dignity, her marriage, the life she thought she had built. She cried for her mother, who had warned her once that charm without respect was poison. She cried for the little girl she had been, the one who dreamed of love, only to grow into a woman humiliated by the very man she trusted most. Her phone buzzed on the table. Messages poured in. Headlines, gossip links, concerned notes from distant acquaintances who hadn't spoken to her in years, but now wanted to bask in the drama. She couldn't bring herself to read them. She turned the phone face down, as though ignoring it would erase the humiliation. But she couldn't ignore the voice in her head. How could he do this to me? How could he do this to our baby? The memory of Damien's foot striking her, of Elena's smirk, replayed again and again until she felt sick. She rushed to the bathroom, retching violently, gripping the porcelain sink for support. When it was over, she stared at her reflection. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, her eyes red and swollen. She barely recognized herself. "This isn't me," she whispered hoarsely. But the truth was brutal. It was her. She was the broken wife who had been kicked in public, who had walked away with tears streaming down her face while the world watched. For days, she barely left her bedroom. The curtains stayed closed. The meals the staff left at her door remained untouched. She lay curled on the bed, one hand always on her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn child. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to feel that pain." The tabloids feasted on her silence. Paparazzi camped outside the gates, hungry for the next photograph. Opinion pieces filled newspapers, some condemning Damien, others blaming her. Strangers online debated her life like it was entertainment. Why did she even show up at the gala? She knew he had a mistress. What did she expect? She should leave him, but she won't. Women like her never do. Every cruel comment dug deeper into her wounds. She felt stripped bare, dissected for the world's amusement. She wanted to vanish, to disappear into the shadows and never be seen again. At night, sleep didn't come. Instead, memories haunted her. The early days when Damien brought her coffee, the way he looked at her when they said their vows, the nights they dreamed about their future. Was it all a lie? Or had the man she loved truly become a stranger? Her body ached, not just from pregnancy but from despair. She stopped brushing her hair, stopped answering the phone, stopped caring about anything beyond keeping her baby safe. Days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. One evening, she stood in the nursery. The room was painted a soft sky blue, the crib Damien had ordered sitting in the corner, untouched. A tiny blanket embroidered with the baby's name lay folded neatly on the rocking chair. Sophia ran her fingers across the fabric, her tears dripping onto the thread. For the first time, a terrifying thought entered her mind. Maybe they'd be better off without me. Maybe I'm too weak to raise this child alone. The thought sent a chill through her. She shook her head violently, clutching her stomach. No, I can't think like that. I won't. But the darkness lingered. She felt trapped between despair and responsibility, between the urge to collapse and the need to survive. One morning, as she sat by the window staring at nothing, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it, but a few moments later, it buzzed once more, and again. Frustrated, she finally reached for it. It wasn't gossip this time. It was a message from an unknown number. "Sophia, I saw what happened. You don't deserve this. Meet me. I can help." Her breath caught. She read it again and again. The number wasn't saved, but something about the message felt urgent, real. Could it be a trap? A journalist fishing for a story? Or was it someone who truly cared? She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then another message came. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let them break you. Tomorrow, noon, Café Verona." Sophia's heart raced. Someone out there believed in her, someone who thought she wasn't finished. But who? For the first time since the gala, a spark flickered inside her. She didn't know who was waiting at Cafe Verona. She didn't know if she could trust them. But she knew one thing: she couldn't keep drowning in despair. And the moment she decided to step out of the shadows, the tide of her story began to turn. The following morning, sunlight streamed into the mansion for the first time in days. Sophia hadn't opened the curtains herself, the staff must have, but she didn't stop them. Something in her had shifted since the mysterious text. She no longer wanted to sit in darkness. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that hid her swollen belly but gave her enough strength to face the outside world. As she looked in the mirror, she saw the traces of despair still etched in her face, but beneath them was something new: resolve. At noon, she arrived at Cafe Verona, a small, elegant spot tucked away on a quiet street. It was the kind of place where deals were whispered over cappuccinos and secrets exchanged between the clink of porcelain cups. She walked in cautiously, her eyes scanning the room, and then she saw him. At a corner table sat a man she hadn't seen in years, Michael Torres, her childhood friend. He stood immediately when he saw her, his dark eyes filled with both concern and warmth. Michael had grown from the boy she remembered into a man with the kind of confidence that came from success earned, not inherited. "Sophia," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I saw everything." She sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "Everyone saw." Michael shook his head. "Everyone saw, but no one acted. That's what makes me sick. He humiliated you in front of the world, and they all let it happen." Sophia lowered her gaze. "Because he's powerful. And I'm just his wife." Michael leaned closer. "You're not just his wife, you're Sophia, and I think you've forgotten who you really are." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" Michael pulled out a folder from his leather briefcase. Inside were papers, photographs, and financial statements. "Damien thinks he owns everything, but I've been following his trail for months. His empire isn't as bulletproof as he makes it seem. He's reckless, Sophia. He's been using company funds for his affair with Elena, laundering money through shell corporations, bribing officials. I have evidence, solid evidence." Her breath caught. She stared at the documents, her heart pounding. "Why? Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve justice. And because if you want to fight back, you can't do it with tears. You need power. This," he tapped the folder, "is power." Sophia's mind raced. For months she had felt powerless, trapped in Damien's world, suffocating under his control. But here, for the first time, was proof that he wasn't untouchable. He could bleed. Michael's voice softened. "I know you, Sophia. You've always been stronger than you realize. Damien built his empire on your sacrifices. You stood by him when no one else did. And now he thinks he can throw you away like garbage? No, you don't have to let him. We can bring him down." She closed her eyes, gripping the edge of the table. Part of her still wanted to run, to hide, to protect her baby from more chaos. But another part, the part that had been humiliated in front of flashing cameras, was rising. "What do I have to do?" she asked quietly. Michael smiled faintly. "First, take care of yourself. The baby comes first. But once you're ready, we'll move. We'll leak the right documents to the press. We'll alert the authorities. And when the time is right, we'll expose Damien for what he really is." Sophia's hands tightened around the folder. She imagined Damien's smug face, Elena's cruel smirk, the crowd's silence as she cried out in pain. Rage simmered inside her, no longer a wildfire but a steady, controlled burn. "I won't let him get away with this," she whispered. "Not anymore." Over the next few weeks, Sophia transformed. She still carried the wounds of humiliation, but now they fueled her instead of breaking her. She began seeing a doctor regularly, ensuring her baby was safe. She met with lawyers Michael recommended, discreetly preparing for divorce. And late at night, when the mansion was silent, she studied the evidence Michael had given her. Damien, meanwhile, continued flaunting Elena. He brushed off the scandal as overblown gossip, paid off reporters, and charmed investors with promises of new ventures. But behind his arrogance, cracks were forming. Whispers of mismanagement began circulating. Rumors of his temper leaked, and quietly Sophia's team pushed the right documents into the right hands. One morning, Damien stormed into the mansion, his face red with fury. "What the hell are you doing, Sophia?" he shouted. She looked up from the breakfast table, her calm composure unsettling him. "Eating breakfast? Why?" "Don't play games with me. Someone's leaking my financial records. My investors are calling non-stop. Do you know anything about this?" Sophia held his gaze steadily. Maybe the truth has a way of finding its own light. His eyes narrowed. For the first time he seemed unsure, even rattled. "You think you can fight me? You're nothing without me." Sophia stood slowly, her hand resting on her belly. "No, Damien, I was everything before you. And you're about to learn that I'm not the one who's nothing. You are." His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He stormed out, barking orders at his assistant. Sophia sat back down, her lips curling into the faintest smile. The tide was turning. Still, doubt gnawed at her in quiet moments. Could she really defeat him? Could she protect her baby while dismantling his empire? Or would Damien strike back with the kind of vengeance that could destroy her completely? Late one night, she stood on the balcony, the city lights glowing like stars beneath her. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "I will not let him win." Behind her, the phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael. "Everything is set. Tomorrow, the first story breaks." Sophia turned, her eyes fierce, her voice steady, because tomorrow was the beginning of Damien Carter's downfall. The morning headlines struck Damien like a thunderbolt. Billionaire Damien Carter under investigation for fraud. Luxury empire built on lies? Insider claims Carter funneled millions to Mistress. The front page of every major newspaper carried his face, not smiling in triumph at a gala, but scowling as he shoved his pregnant wife in front of flashing cameras. The image had gone viral, Damien's foot raised, Sophia clutching her stomach, Alina smirking in the background. It was damning, and now the financial records leaked by Michael only added fuel to the fire. Investors panicked. Shares of Carter Holdings plummeted. Board members who once praised Damien now whispered about betrayal. Lawsuits piled up, and the authorities launched a full investigation into his finances. For the first time in his life, Damien wasn't in control. Meanwhile, Sophia stood quietly at the center of the storm she had unleashed. She had chosen not to hide anymore. On the day the first exposé aired, she appeared on national television, composed, dignified, and glowing with the strength she had nearly forgotten she possessed. She wore a simple black dress, her baby bump visible, her voice steady. "I stayed silent for too long," she told the interviewer. "But silence only protects abusers. My husband humiliated me, betrayed me, and endangered me and my unborn child. He believed I was powerless. But women are never powerless, not when they decide to rise." Her words reverberated across the country. Social media exploded with support. Thousands of women shared their own stories under the hashtag #RiseWithSophia. What had begun as humiliation was now a movement. Damien watched the broadcast from his penthouse, his hands shaking as he hurled a glass against the wall. Alina tried to soothe him, but even she looked uneasy. The man she had attached herself to was slipping, and with him, so was her chance at the life she craved. "Don't worry," Damien growled. "I'll fix this. She doesn't know who she's dealing with." But for once, he was wrong. The following week, Sophia filed for divorce. Unlike the timid woman he thought he had broken, she came armed with lawyers, evidence, and public opinion on her side. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, cameras flashing as she walked in with her head high. Damien sneered across the aisle, but his smirk faltered when Sophia's attorneys laid out the case. The fraud, the embezzlement, the abuse. Document after document was presented, each one a nail in the coffin of his empire. Elena's name appeared in the evidence too. Records of lavish gifts purchased with stolen company money, photographs of luxury trips billed as business expenses, and even texts where she bragged about bleeding him dry. She sat in the gallery, her face pale as her name became synonymous with scandal. When the judge asked Sophia if she had anything to say, she rose slowly. "I gave Damien everything," she said, her voice strong. "My youth, my loyalty, my love. And he repaid me with betrayal and violence. I stand here today not as a victim, but as a mother, a woman, and a survivor. I won't let him define me. I will define myself." The courtroom erupted in applause, something rarely seen in such a setting. The judge silenced the crowd but couldn't hide her own look of respect. The divorce was granted swiftly, Sophia won full custody of her child, significant assets, and the Carter estate itself. Damien left the courthouse not as a billionaire titan but as a disgraced man, stripped of his empire and his reputation. Elena didn't fare better. With her name plastered across headlines, she became unemployable. Friends who once laughed at her jokes avoided her calls. She had hitched her future to Damien's fortune. And when it crumbled, so did she. Within months, she disappeared from the social scene entirely. For Sophia, however, life blossomed. She poured her energy into charities for women and children, using part of her settlement to create shelters for those fleeing abuse. Her story inspired thousands, and she became a symbol of resilience. One evening, months after the trial, Sophia sat on the porch of her estate, her baby boy cradled in her arms. The night air was calm, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Michael stepped outside, setting 2 mugs of tea on the table. "You did it," he said quietly. Sophia smiled down at her son. "No," she whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. "We did it. He gave me a reason to fight, and I'll never stop fighting. For him, for myself, for every woman who's been told she's powerless." The baby stirred softly, as if comforted by her words. Sophia leaned back, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Damien and Elena were nothing but shadows now. Their laughter, their arrogance, their cruelty, gone. What remained was Sophia's strength, forged in the fire of humiliation and reborn as something indestructible. Her revenge had not just destroyed them, it had rebuilt her. And as the world looked on, Sophia proved a truth no one could ever erase. When a woman rises, she cannot be stopped. All right, my friend, so the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a way words alone can't explain. Sophia's story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience, about rediscovering strength when the world tries to break you. Life often hands us moments of humiliation, of pain, of silence, when we expect others to stand for us and they don't. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Sophia found that strength. She turned despair into dignity, shame into power, and heartbreak into healing. And so can you. Sometimes the people closest to us betray us. Sometimes the crowd stays silent when we need them to speak. But Epictetus reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And Sophia chose to rise. She chose not to let Damien define her story. Instead, she rewrote it with courage, with love for her child, and with an unshakable belief that she was more than her pain. And maybe, just maybe, you needed to hear that today. That whatever storm you're facing, it doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something greater. So, my wonderful friends, if you felt even a spark of strength through this story, I ask you to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope tonight, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep walking through these stories together. Because no matter how dark the night, remember, a woman or a man who chooses to rise cannot be stopped.